Allison, when teaching composition, do you prefer to use nonfiction or fiction, as in short stories, drama, poetry?
I prefer kind of to incorporate elements of both. I think that for a lot of students, if you tell them we're going to do drama, we're going to do poetry, we're going to do short stories, they get overwhelmed. They don't necessarily equate the writing that they can do, or even the writing that they want to do, with the words reflected in those kinds of texts. That to them is something that's high school English, and they're either intimidated by it, by those texts, or they just don't want any part of it. I try to slowly introduce that when I do use it. I use a lot of nonfiction. I use a lot of the communication that they're more familiar with. So on the first day of my classes in my, let's say, English 101s, we ask, what's the first thing, what's the last thing you read, what's the last thing that you wrote, and I use that sort of as a way to build. If I get a lot of answers that are referencing novels or poems or drama, then we spend more time dealing with literature. Quite often though, I haven't read anything. The last thing I read was the syllabus. The last thing I wrote was a text message. And when that's the case, I kind of approach it as, okay, let's talk about effective communication, because essentially a text message or an email or a tweet is something that still has a message. You're writing it for an intended audience. You're writing it for a reason. It often has elements of revision and editing, and so then we can kind of use that as a jumping off point. But again, I think that literature is important. A lot of times they need to be exposed, so it's important for them to see this is what my writing could be. I also think for a student who is in a 101 or a 102 or 103 class, that's their first foray into English a lot of times in college. And while it does need to be focused on composition, on writing, on production, we would be doing them a disservice to never expose them to literature, because quite often those students are going to go on to take a 200 level literature survey. And so incorporating the writing that they are maybe more familiar with, right, so interpersonal communication kind of stuff, with novels and short stories, poems even, if you can connect sort of the skills that they are using in their day-to-day communication with some of the larger skills that are necessary in creating a work of literature, that can kind of bridge the gap and make that less intimidating for them.
Yeah. Do you think, given that you're helping students prepare for success in life, as well as in more narrowly the working world, do you think they're more likely to encounter nonfiction than fiction in their daily lives and in their working lives? Is that one of the rationales behind using nonfiction to teach composition?
Yeah, I think so. I think for many of them, they are not, they may be avid readers, but probably the majority of them are going to be encountering more nonfiction texts. Certainly communication, they're going to be authoring, I think, more nonfiction texts in their day-to-day lives, and so that can be a way for them to equate this particular English class that they just have to get through so they can get into their engineering program as a way to kind of really build on skills that they'll use for the rest of their time in college, and also in the real world. I mean, I've used cover letters and resumes before in a 101 to kind of explain how this is relevant.
Great. Thank you, Alice.